Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a truly profound journey, one that takes us to a really pivotal moment in human history. It's a story where, the sheer brilliance of scientific discovery collides with the brutal realities of global conflict. And it irrevocably altered not just the course of a war, but, well, the very future of humanity. We're talking about the dawn of the atomic age. Our mission today is to unpack how fundamental scientific breakthroughs, some stretching back centuries, really unexpectedly culminated in the most destructive power ever known. We'll trace how this monumental project unfolded in the shadow of a global war, and then examine the immediate and lasting impacts it had on geopolitics and, on the very concept of warfare itself.
And this is a topic that truly resonates, even today. It's inherently complex. It touches on so many facets of our existence, from pure science and ethics to, the dynamics of power and the rawest aspects of human nature. This deep dive isn't just about recounting history. It's really about providing crucial context and understanding for a reality that is, in many ways, still unfolding around us. You'll find that understanding this specific period gives you a unique lens through which to view much of the 20th and, frankly, the 21st centuries.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because before we can even begin to talk about the bombs themselves, the actual devices, we have to journey far back, don't we? Tracing the long arc of scientific inquiry. How did the very building blocks of atomic theory, these seemingly abstract investigations, ultimately lead us to this point of unprecedented power? It truly started with some early, almost accidental discoveries that at the time seemed to have purely academic significance.
That's right. Like, take Martin Klaproth. Way back in 1789, the French Revolution is kicking off in Europe. And this German chemist discovers a dense metallic element. He names it uranium. In the scientific world back then, chemistry was largely focused on identifying elements, right? Classifying them, understanding basic properties. Uranium was just, well, another addition to the periodic table. Noted for its density, sure, but kind of esoteric.
Right, just another piece in the puzzle.
Exactly. Yet this seemingly innocuous discovery laid the earliest foundational groundwork for everything that would follow. But a powerful reminder, isn't it? How pure scientific curiosity, just pursued for its own sake, often has these completely unforeseen consequences, sometimes on a scale that's just unimaginable, from a lab curiosity to something that reshapes nations.
It really is. And then building on that early classification.
We see Marie Curie enter the scene, late 19th century, and she fundamentally changes our understanding of matter itself. Her groundbreaking research into uranium and its compounds, starting in the 1890s, revealed that uranium wasn't inert. It was actively emitting rays. She figured out these emissions were an inherent property of the atom itself, not just some chemical reaction.
Okay, so coming from the atom.
Precisely. And in a truly revolutionary move, she coined the very term radioactive to describe this fascinating phenomenon, this spontaneous emission of particles and energy from disintegrating atoms. This just fundamentally challenged the prevailing view that atoms were indivisible. These unchangeable building blocks. Suddenly, atoms were dynamic. They were undergoing internal transformation. That was a staggering intellectual leap at the time.
Wow. And from Curie's work revealing this dynamic nature, then we get to Ernest Rutherford.
Yes, Rutherford. In 1911, he was a New Zealand-born physicist, and building on earlier models, he formulated what we now call the Rutherford model of the atom. The famous gold foil experiment.
Vaguely, yeah. Shooting particles at gold foil.
That's the one. He shot alpha particles at this thin sheet of gold foil. Most particles went straight through, as expected if the atom was just a sort of plum pudding. But, and this was the surprise, a few were deflected at sharp angles. Some even bounced right back.
Huh. So not just empty space, then?
Exactly. It led him to conclude that atoms were mostly empty space, but contained a tiny, dense, positively charged nucleus at the center, and the low-mass electrons orbited around it. This was a critical step in understanding atomic structure, moving science beyond just a vague idea of an atom to a more concrete picture of how it was actually built.
It's incredible to think how these early steps, just pure scientific curiosity, often individuals working almost in isolation. They were unknowingly paving the way for something truly revolutionary, something they couldn't possibly have foreseen.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here is the rapid acceleration of discovery that then occurred in the 1930s. The groundwork laid by Klaproth, Curie, Rutherford, that provided the essential foundation. But in the 30s, the pace just picked up dramatically. Almost like the scientific community was collectively racing towards some kind of breakthrough, even if they didn't know the full implications of what they were doing. Scientists across the globe were building on each other's work, often in the spirit of open collaboration, even as political divides were starting to emerge really sharply in Europe.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Where the theoretical starts to merge with, well,
Hmm.
with frightening practical implications. 1933, Leo Szilard. He's a Hungarian-German physicist. And he has this incredible insight, supposedly while waiting at a traffic light in London, of all places.
Yeah, the story goes he was thinking about Rutherford's work and H.G. Wells.
And he conceives the theoretical possibility of a self-sustaining nuclear fission reaction, what we now call a nuclear chain reaction. He realized if an atom could be split by a neutron and that split released more neutrons, well, those new neutrons could then split more atoms, creating this exponential release of energy.
It was an intellectual leap of incredible magnitude, just stunning foresight. It wasn't just observing something, it was conceptualizing how it could be harnessed,
Yeah.
amplified, leading to just unimaginable power.
And then the very next year, 1934, you have Enrico Fermi in Italy.
Right, Fermi. He's conducting his own experiments, bombarding different elements with neutrons, and quite remarkably, he unknowingly splits neutrons within uranium atoms. It really highlights the serendipitous nature of some discoveries, doesn't it? Sometimes you're looking for one thing.
And you stumble onto something far bigger.
Exactly. But Fermi, he didn't immediately grasp the full implications of what he'd achieved. Not right away.
So these pieces are starting to come together. Szilard's theory, Fermi's accidental experiment.
And then the confirmation comes. It was Lise Meitner, an Austrian-Swedish physicist, working closely with the German chemist Otto Hahn. Late 1938, Hahn, working in Berlin, bombards uranium with neutrons, and he finds barium, a much lighter element. He was baffled by this result, chemically speaking. It didn't make sense based on known nuclear physics at the time.
So he didn't realize he'd split the atom?
Not initially. He wrote to Meitner about it. Now, Meitner, this is tragic. Due to Nazi anti-Semitism, she'd been forced to flee Germany just months earlier. She was in Sweden. But despite being in exile, Meitner, working with her nephew Otto Frisch, correctly interpreted Hahn's results. She did the calculations that confirmed the uranium nucleus had indeed split, releasing an enormous amount of energy. And she famously named the process nuclear fission.
Wow. So she identified it, named it, even though she was forced out of her lab.
Yes, a pivotal figure, even facing immense personal challenges. And this crucial moment, it really raises an important question, doesn't it? What happens when foundational scientific knowledge born from this international collaboration, this pure curiosity, what happens when it suddenly gets tangled up with global conflict, with the very real, terrifying threat of war?
And that entanglement, that global catalyst, it came very swiftly and brutally with the rise of fascism and Nazi anti-Semitism in Europe. This political turmoil directly influenced the trajectory of atomic research, didn't it? It forced brilliant minds to flee. Scientists like Leo Szilard, who was Jewish, found themselves having to migrate to the United States. He left in 1938 to avoid persecution.
And Fermi, too. Enrico Fermi, another giant in the field, along with his wife Laura Capon, who was Jewish. They left Italy at the end of 1938, escaping the growing fascism there, arriving in New York City. This exodus, this forced migration of genius, it brought an extraordinary concentration of scientific talent to the United States, almost by tragic circumstance.
A tragic brain drain for Europe, but a huge gain for the U.S., scientifically speaking.
Absolutely. And it created this unique intellectual crucible in America. So when news of Hahn and Meitner's fission discovery reached Szilard in New York in early 1939, it wasn't just academic curiosity that sparked. Szilard, with his collaborator Walter Zinn, quickly set about confirming their findings, replicating Hahn's experiment. And the profound implications hit Szilard almost immediately. His reaction, in his own words, was just stark and chilling.
What did he say?
He said, "That night there was very little doubt in my mind that the world was headed for grief." Just think about that. Not just a scientific breakthrough, but this terrifying realization of immense destructive potential. He felt it would fundamentally alter humanity's future.
Headed for grief. That really underscores the immense burden of knowledge these scientists suddenly carried, doesn't it? Szilard and Fermi immediately began working on building a nuclear reactor at Columbia University, trying to demonstrate a controlled chain reaction. But driving their efforts was this pervasive, terrifying fear.
The fear of a German bomb.
Exactly. The strong possibility that German scientists, fully backing the Nazi war effort, were doing the exact same thing, maybe even ahead. The thought of a Nazi bomb, with its unimaginable power, falling into the hands of Hitler's regime, that became the ultimate motivator for their urgent work.
And this leads us to one of the most critical moments in the entire story. The direct bridge from scientific theory to national policy. the Einstein-Szilard letter.
Right. Solid knew they needed to get the government's attention.
He did. In July 1939, Szilard contacted the most famous scientist in the world, Albert Einstein, who was then living out on Long Island. Szilard explained the concept of nuclear chain reaction, its potential for bomb making. Einstein, despite being a deep pacifist, he instantly grasped the gravity of the situation, the danger if Germany got there first. So together, they drafted a letter to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's dated August 6, 1939. And the warning in that letter was absolutely clear, chillingly prescient.
What did it say exactly?
It stated, and I'm quoting here, "This new phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs. And it is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may thus be constructed." It urged the president to establish contact with the physicists working on this in America, and crucially, to secure a supply of uranium ore.
Astonishing foresight. Just weeks before WWII actually breaks out in Europe. But the letter didn't reach Roosevelt immediately, did it?
No, there was a delay. It wasn't actually delivered until October 1939. An economist named Alexander Sachs handed it to him personally. But once Roosevelt learned of the potential risk, the impact was immediate and profound. Sachs reportedly told him, "This will make the TNT explosive look like a child's firecracker."
Wow.
And Roosevelt responded swiftly. He formed the Advisory Committee on Uranium. It held its very first meeting just weeks later, October 21st, 1939. This shows how quickly the scientific threat, initially just theoretical, transformed from academic discussion into an urgent matter of national security. It really set the stage for one of the most ambitious scientific and engineering endeavors in history.
So that initial fear, particularly the fear of Germany getting the bomb first, was the real driver.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes clear this wasn't just about scientific curiosity anymore. Not by a long shot. It was about national survival, about the future of global power, the political climate dominated by the looming threat of Nazi Germany and this terrifying new potential weapon. It directly propelled the urgency of atomic research. In a way, pure science, science for its own sake, never could have. The race was well and truly on, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. It created this unprecedented intersection of science, war, and political will.
Okay, so the scientific seeds were sown, the alarm was raised with Roosevelt. But the question then becomes, how did the United States, a nation historically, kind of wary of large standing armies and huge government projects in peacetime, how did it manage to mobilize for something so unprecedented, so secretive, and just utterly massive? Because that advisory committee on uranium, it moved pretty slowly at first, right?
It did. Good intentions, but not much urgency or funding initially. Progress was slow. It really needed a definitive, undeniable catalyst to overcome that inertia.
And that catalyst was Pearl Harbor.
Exactly. December 7, 1941. Japan's surprise attack. That changed everything overnight. The U.S. was formally, unequivocally at war. And the question of uranium development, the potential construction of an atomic bomb, it gained urgent, renewed interest and immediate massive government backing. The theoretical became desperately practical. The fate of the war, maybe the world hanging in the balance.
And wasn't there also validation coming from Britain around that time?
Yes, that was crucial too. A report from British scientists, the MAUD report, issued in March 1941, it confirmed the feasibility of building a uranium-based bomb with a relatively small amount of fissile material. This provided vital validation for the American scientists. It turned speculation into confirmed potential, but the sheer scale needed, the resources. It quickly became obvious this was beyond academic means, so the committee leaders turned to the military for the logistical and financial muscle required.
And that marks a profound shift, doesn't it? From theoretical science in labs to this huge industrial military complex project, demanding resources and organization only a government fully at war could provide.
Yes, the military's involvement was absolutely essential. It transformed the committee into a full-blown, top-secret operation. August 13, 1942. The Army Corps of Engineers takes charge. They create the Manhattan Engineer District. Named for its New York City offices, interestingly enough, though the main work would happen elsewhere, that was the administrative backbone.
And then came General Groves.
Leslie R. Groves, appointed September 17, 1942. Immediately promoted from colonel to brigadier general, Groves was known as a doer, a driver, decisive action, immense organizational skill. He'd just overseen the construction of the Pentagon, and he showed it immediately. Within just 2 days of his appointment, he selected the 3 primary sites for the project, recognizing the urgent need for parallel development, getting things moving fast.
And these sites were spread out, right? Specialized.
Yeah, exactly. Geographically dispersed, highly specialized, and operating under intense secrecy. First, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. That was designated for uranium enrichment. which is this complex, incredibly resource-intensive process of separating the rare fissile U-235 isotope from the much more common U-238, a massive industrial undertaking on its own.
Okay, so Oak Ridge for uranium. What were the others?
Then Los Alamos, New Mexico, codenamed Project Y. This was the Secret Weapons Research Laboratory, the intellectual heart of the project, where the bombs would actually be designed, engineered, constructed, bringing together the nation's top scientific minds in total isolation.
And the third site?
Hanford, Washington. That was designated to produce plutonium. Remember, plutonium isn't naturally occurring. Scientists had figured out it could be produced in uranium reactors. U-238 captures a neutron, then decays into plutonium-239. And critically, this new element, plutonium, proved to be even more fissile than U-235. Easier to get a chain reaction. But it also presented different, arguably harder engineering challenges for bomb design. It offered a second path to the bomb.
Two paths, uranium and plutonium, running in parallel.
Yes. And while Groves was making these huge logistical decisions, setting up these vast sites, a foundational scientific breakthrough was happening, somewhat improbably, beneath the bleachers of the unused squash courts at the University of Chicago.
Right. This is Fermi and Szilard again.
It is. They'd moved from Columbia, and on December 15, 1942, they successfully constructed and operated the first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction, Chicago Pile 1, or CP1. This was a pivotal moment, a game changer. Now, it only produced enough energy to maybe power a light bulb for a bit, tiny amount, but it provided a concrete working proof of concept. It showed a chain reaction was achievable and, crucially, controllable. It paved the way for the large-scale reactors needed to produce plutonium at Hanford.
The scale of this whole Manhattan project, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Even now, formal approval from Roosevelt, end of December 42, and then it just ballooned.
Into a truly massive enterprise across the United States. Over 30 project sites, laboratories, vast industrial complexes, employed more than 100,000 workers, from Nobel laureates to construction workers, engineers, administrative staff, a huge, diverse workforce.
And the cost?
Around $2.2 billion back then, which is staggering. Tens, maybe hundreds of billions in today's money, especially during wartime when resources were stretched thin anyway. And despite this immense scale, the number of people involved, the project largely remained shrouded in intense secrecy. Many, probably most, of the workers doing construction or technical tasks, they had no idea what the ultimate purpose was, which speaks volumes about the security, the compartmentalization Groves insisted on.
Yeah, that level of secrecy itself is incredible.
It really raises an important question, doesn't it? How do you manage something that vast, that sensitive, involving so many people, so much groundbreaking science, and keep its true purpose hidden from most involved? It really speaks to the unique pressures of wartime. National security trumped everything. Compartmentalization on an unprecedented level.
So after Fermi's success in Chicago, the project is pursuing these two parallel paths.
Right. Uranium and plutonium, building both kinds of bombs, ultimately resulting in Little Boy, which was the gun method uranium bomb, and Fat Man, the more complex implosion method plutonium bomb.
And overseeing the design, the actual creation of these weapons at Los Alamos, that was J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Correct. Groves selected Oppenheimer, this brilliant theoretical physicist, a professor from Berkeley. Groves apparently admired his intellect, his quick mind, his broad understanding, even though Oppenheimer had zero experience running anything near this scale. Oppenheimer's primary focus, and really the greater technical challenge, was making the plutonium bomb work.
Why was the plutonium one harder?
Well, the gun method for uranium was conceptually more familiar. You basically fire one subcritical piece of uranium into another to achieve critical mass, like firing a bullet down a barrel. But the implosion method needed for plutonium was totally new. It relied on the incredibly precise, perfectly symmetrical compression of a plutonium sphere, squeezing it rapidly from all sides at once using conventional explosive to make it dense enough, fast enough to achieve critical mass and initiate the chain reaction.
Why couldn't they just use the gun method for plutonium too?
Good question. It turns out plutonium-239 has a much higher rate of spontaneous fission than uranium-235. It naturally spits out more neutrons. So if you tried to assemble it relatively slowly, like in a gun-type device, there's a very high probability it would start the chain reaction too early, it would pre-detonate. You'd get a fizzle, a small explosion, instead of the massive blast they need.
Right, so the implosion was the only way to assemble it fast enough.
Exactly. But getting that perfectly symmetrical compression using precisely shaped explosive charges, it was an enormous engineering puzzle. And because of this instability, the unprecedented nature of the implosion method, Oppenheimer felt a full-scale test was absolutely necessary. They had to know if it would actually work.
But Groves hesitated.
He did initially, and for good reason. Plutonium was incredibly expensive and extremely rare at the time, painstakingly produced tiny amounts at a time in those massive reactors at Hanford. A test would use up a significant fraction of their stockpile. But given the high stakes, the scientific unknowns, Groves ultimately relented. He approved the test, which really highlights the challenges, right? It went far beyond just theory. This required real-world, high-stakes testing. Failure wasn't really an option.
And that brings us to the ultimate moment of truth, the culmination of all this effort, the Trinity Test. Oppenheimer named it, right? From a poem.
Yes, Oppenheimer, a man deeply versed in literature, apparently found inspiration in the 17th century poet John Donne, specifically from the line, "Batter my heart, three-person God," in one of his holy sonnets, giving this purely scientific military endeavor a layer of, well, almost spiritual resonance, or maybe foreboding.
And the test wasn't at Los Alamos itself.
No, they needed a remote, isolated spot. They chose a site at Alamogordo, New Mexico, about 200 miles south of Los Alamos. Flat, desolate desert terrain. Hundreds of Manhattan Project workers meticulously prepared the site, building observation bunkers, wiring miles of instrumentation, assembling the device itself.
The gadget.
That was its nickname, Gadget. It was a formidable device, contained about 13 pounds of that precious plutonium, and it utilized that complex, unproven implosion method. To simulate how it would be deployed from a bomber, they hoisted Gadget 100 feet up in the air, suspended from a massive steel tower. Then, in the pre-dawn darkness, precisely 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the Trinity Test began.
And the results.
Staggering. Utterly staggering. Far exceeded even Oppenheimer's own expectations. He'd apparently predicted, maybe hoped for, an explosion equivalent to about 0.3 kilotons of TNT, maybe up to 5. The actual blast equated to roughly 21 kilotons, 21,000 tons of TNT. It was an explosion of power previously unknown, unimagined by humanity. A sudden, blinding, thunderous birth of the atomic age.
The sensory details must have been overwhelming.
Reports are incredible. The flash, so bright it temporarily blinded observers miles away, even through protective welding glass. Witnesses reported seeing the flash illuminate the distant mountains as if it were broad daylight. Then came this immense wave of heat. The heat was so intense it completely vaporized the massive steel tower holding the Gadget. Just gone. It left a crater in the desert floor 5 feet deep, 30 feet wide.
And it melted the sand.
Yes, perhaps the most eerie artifact. It melted the desert sand, fusing it into a mildly radioactive green glass. Scientists later named it Trinitite. You can still find small pieces today, though it's illegal to remove them. And of course, the mushroom cloud, rising miles into the atmosphere, the haunting new symbol of this destructive power.
And Oppenheimer's famous quote.
Yes, in that moment, witnessing this unimaginable power, this force he had helped unleash, Oppenheimer famously recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It's a quote that just encapsulates the awe, the terror, the profound, almost overwhelming realization of what they had done. This power had moved from theory into terrifying reality in a single, blinding, explosive instant.
Imagine being there. Imagine being one of those first witnesses, confronting a power like that previously unimaginable, a force that could reshape landscapes, instantly vaporize steel, the shock, the awe, maybe the terror. It's almost incomprehensible. It truly was a moment that forever changed the world, the end of one era, the chilling dawn of another. So the test was a success, a terrifying success. The bomb was a reality. But what did this all mean for the world? The immediate end of World War II was one thing, obviously. But the ripple effects spread so far beyond that initial purpose, didn't they? Fundamentally altering global power, the nature of conflict, for decades to come.
Absolutely. The success of Trinity, its explosive power being so much greater than expected, it immediately became a crucial factor on the world stage. President Harry Truman, who'd just taken over after Roosevelt's death, he received word of the test's success while he was at the Potsdam Conference, meeting with Churchill and Stalin.
Talk about a poker chip.
Exactly. He immediately used this news as significant leverage. He informed Stalin vaguely about a new weapon of unusual destructive force, and it strengthened his resolve in demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. The Potsdam Declaration was issued calling for surrender or facing prompt and utter destruction. Japanese officials, however, initially chose to ignore the demand, likely unaware, as you said, of the true nature of this new weapon.
And so the decision was made to use it.
Yes. And while the discovery and harnessing of atomic energy certainly served its immediate purpose, bringing World War II to a rapid, fiery end, and averting that potentially devastating ground invasion of Japan, which strategists thought could cost millions of lives on both sides, it also undeniably resulted in immense human cost.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. Nagasaki, August 9th, leading to an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 deaths, mostly Japanese civilians, often in what can only be described as inhuman ways. Not just the blast and fire, but the horrific effects of radiation poisoning, a new, terrifying form of mass death that lingered long after the bombs fell.
And this profound duality, ending the war, saving lives potentially, but at such horrific cost.
That means the debate over the decision to use these bombs.
Huh.
It will be an endless part of American public life. Historians, ethicists, the public. We continue to grapple with its necessity, its morality, its consequences. There are no easy answers.
It's a debate that still feels raw, doesn't it? And interestingly, you mentioned American public perception shifted.
It did.
Yeah.
Initially, right after the bombings in August 1945, a Gallup poll showed overwhelming public approval. Something like 85% of Americans supported using the bombs. Probably saw it as a necessary evil to end a brutal war, quickly save American lives, understandable in context. But just a few months later, that number dropped significantly, down to around 65%. As the immediate relief wore off, a period of introspection seemed to set in.
People started thinking more deeply about it.
Exactly. The immediate crisis was over. Suddenly, there was time for review, reflection. People started learning more about the effects, especially radiation sickness. Ethical and existential questions started surfacing. It wasn't just about statistics anymore. It reflected a dawning understanding of the unprecedented threat these weapons posed long-term. Maybe a growing unease about the devastation.
So the relief gave way to something else. Fear. Concern.
I think all of the above. And what's fascinating is how quickly that happened. Society started grappling with this entirely new reality, this power. Because the atomic bombs didn't just end a war, they fundamentally began new eras in human history. They were absolutely central to the development of the Cold War, becoming its most dangerous, defining feature. And they ushered in the enduring atomic age, which, as we know, is very much still with us today, shaping international relations, the very concept of security.
And thinkers at the time grasped this almost immediately, didn't they? Realizing humanity had crossed some kind of irreversible threshold.
They did. Take Norman Cousins. He was editor of the influential Saturday Review of Literature, a strong Roosevelt supporter. In August 45, just days after the bombings, he published this searing article, later expanded into a book, Modern Man is Obsolete. Cousins wasn't arguing about ending WWII. His concern was much bigger, almost prophetic. He worried these superweapons could lead to the complete obliteration of the human species.
Wow. That's heavy, just days after.
It was. He chillingly called for a world government, international control over atomic energy, arguing countries would have to cede some degree of national sovereignty to prevent self-destruction. His warning, coming so soon, shocked many, but also sparked this vital global conversation about cooperation in a world suddenly capable of annihilation.
And then there was John Hersey's Hiroshima.
Yes, another hugely impactful piece. First appearing as an entire issue of The New Yorker in August 1946, then a book. Hersey did something different. He interviewed 6 survivors of Hiroshima, people like Koshiko Sasaki, a clerk buried under rubble, Reverend Kiyoshi Tanemoto, who helped the injured. He told their human stories. He deliberately avoided the politics, the ethics, focused solely on the ordinary lives shattered by the bomb.
Bringing it down to a human level.
Exactly. The book sold like crazy, 300,000 copies rapidly. It showed the American public's intense desire for information, but also a growing concern about the human cost. It made the abstract numbers terrifyingly real. Individual suffering, not just statistics, had a massive impact worldwide.
And this growing apprehension, it started to manifest institutionally, too.
It did. A very visible example. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, founded in 1947 by former Manhattan Project scientists, Goldsmith, Rabinowitz, others, based at the University of Chicago. They felt this deep moral responsibility to warn the public about the dangers of nuclear war. And they created one of the most iconic symbols of the nuclear age, the doomsday clock.
Right, the clock counting down to midnight.
Precisely. Designed to illustrate vividly how close humanity is to global catastrophe, to that obliteration Cousins worried about. Just for perspective, as of 2023, the bulletin set the clock at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been. Reflecting ongoing global tensions, nuclear proliferation, it's a stark, constant reminder of the enduring threat.
Chilling. And this profound shift, it obviously impacted military thinking directly.
Immediately. Bernard Brodie, a key military strategist, one of the earliest nuclear deterrence theorists, he published his seminal book, The Absolute Weapon, in 1946, just a year after the war. And he made this pivotal statement, really captured the new reality. So far, the chief purpose of our military establishment has been to win wars. From now, its chief purpose must be to avert them. It can almost have no other useful purpose.
Wow, a complete reorientation, from winning wars to preventing them.
Because nuclear war was seen as unwinnable. Brody understood that instantly. Even Oppenheimer, much later in interviews in the mid-60s, he stood by his role in ending WWII, believing it saved lives overall. But he genuinely believed the bombs, because of their sheer power, would prevent future major wars by forcing nations towards arbitration and conflict resolution, ushering in an era of peace or peacefulness based on mutual fear, a terrifying kind of peace.
A peace based on terror. It seems this nuclear fear, or maybe nuclear respect, took hold very quickly, even before the Soviets got the bomb. And this fundamental change in thinking, it must have had massive implications for military strategy, especially in the U.S.
Oh, huge. Post-1945, military planners started envisioning future war as almost entirely air-centric, based on nuclear weapons delivery. The Army Air Forces, which became the independent U.S. Air Force in 1947, they immediately started planning for long-range bombers, like the massive B-36 Peacemaker, capable of flying over the polar ice caps to deliver atomic strikes deep into Russia in a future conflict. Strategic bombing had found its ultimate terrifying weapon.
And this must have caused friction within the military itself, over budgets.
Absolutely. This new vision, nuclear deterrence, massive retaliation, led to significant, often bitter debates within Congress, within the new national military establishment, later the Department of Defense. Traditionally, defense budgets were sort of divided more evenly between the Army, Navy, Air Force. But the Air Force now saw itself as the most relevant force, the key player in the nuclear age. They could deliver the bombs, so they clamored for a much bigger slice of the pie. This created intense inter-service rivalry, reshaped military spending for decades.
Interesting. And there was also this tension between civilian and military control over the bombs themselves.
Yes, a fascinating and sometimes really dysfunctional dynamic. The Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, set up in 1947, it was deliberately run by civilians. Congress made sure of that. And its mandate placed all fissile materials, the actual plutonium and enriched uranium, under civilian authority, not military. This reflected a deep-seated American fear of unchecked military power holding the ultimate weapon.
That caused problems.
It led to what's been described as an adversarial relationship, almost a food fight, as one historian put it. The AEC, full of scientists, often saw the military leaders as fools, maybe not fully grasping the nuances of the dangers, while the military often viewed the AEC as crooks or overly cautious academics, hoarding the materials they felt they needed for national defense. This apparently created a complete dysfunction of the American atomic enterprise between 1946 and 1950, even while the U.S. had a monopoly.
A monopoly that didn't last long.
No, it didn't. That dysfunctional period was abruptly shattered, August 29, 1949. The Soviet Union explodes its first atomic bomb. Joe 1, the Americans nicknamed it, sent profound shockwaves through the U.S. government, the military, the public. The monopoly was over. And what's really striking about the Soviet bomb, it was essentially a carbon copy of the American Fat Man design.
How? Espionage.
Largely, yes. Thanks to intelligence provided by Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist who'd worked on the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos. Apparently, Lavrenti Beria, head of the Soviet program, insisted they build an exact copy, even when his scientists thought they could improve it. Why? Because the American one was proven to work. But this explosion, Joe 1, it immediately and drastically accelerated the weapons race Oppenheimer had feared. The Cold War just entered its most dangerous phase.
And the U.S. response was build something bigger.
Exactly.
Well,
the Soviet bomb directly spurred the drive for even more powerful weapons. Fusion weapons, hydrogen bombs or H-bombs, capable of destruction orders of magnitude greater than fission bombs. Now, Oppenheimer and his General Advisory Committee at the AEC, they actually questioned the immediate need for an H-bomb program. They preferred pursuing fusion as a scientific experiment, citing the immense destructive potential, the lack of a clear military target for such a weapon, the ethical question.
but others pushed for it.
Oh, yes. Powerful figures like Lewis Strauss, an AEC commissioner, later chairman, and Senator Brian McMahon, chair of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. They pushed relentlessly. This was also Edward Teller's moment, the physicist who had been advocating fiercely for fusion research even during WWII. President Truman, faced with a nuclear-armed Soviet Union, ultimately approved looking into fusion as a weapon in January 1950. A clear, terrifying escalation in the arms race.
And this push for bigger, better weapons was fueled by new military thinking, too.
Yes, the idea that the next war would be instant, total. William Borden, an AEC staffer, former bomber pilot. He argued in his book There Will Be No Time that the U.S. wouldn't have years to mobilize like in WWII. He foresaw smaller atomic weapons on rockets, like advanced V-2s, meaning America needed to be armed at the get-go, fully prepared for instant war. This was a radical break from America's historical aversion to a large, standing peacetime military, which was traditionally seen as expensive, maybe even a threat to democracy itself. This demand for constant readiness, overwhelming power, it led directly to the massive national security establishment we still have today, forever altering the balance. That makes sense. This constant readiness, this arms race, it created that situation Oppenheimer described. The two scorpions in a bottle. Exactly. His famous analogy. Two nuclear-armed powers, locked in this dynamic of escalation, mutual suspicion, with less and less room to maneuver internationally. Every move watched, interpreted as hostile. The very existence of the weapons limited diplomatic options, and the acceleration was just breathtaking. By 1957, just 12 years after Hiroshima, the world had thermonuclear weapons, H-bombs, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, capable of delivering them across continents in minutes. An unprecedented situation, moving from fission bombs to city-destroying hydrogen bombs delivered by unstoppable missiles faster than anyone could have imagined. And you mentioned the true fathers of the H-bomb. Some historians point to a fascinating, maybe disturbing trio embodying the forces at play. Brian McMahon and Louis Strauss providing the relentless political push, and Klaus Sukes, whose espionage gave the Soviets the fission bomb blueprint, which in turn spurred the U.S. H-bomb program. It's incredible how intertwined it all was. Fuchs's arrest was actually announced the day after Truman approved the H-bomb program. Science, politics, espionage, all converging.
And the difference in power between fission and fusion bombs.
Immense. Little boy was around 15-20 kilotons. The first U.S. H-bomb test, IG Mike in 1952, yielded over 10 megatons. That's 10 million tons of TNT equivalent, enough to destroy not just a city center, but an entire metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And then came MIRVs, multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. Missiles like the Minuteman III could carry, say, 3 warheads, each aimed at a separate target. It was an exponential increase not just in firepower, but in delivery capability, the terrifying efficiency of potential destruction.
And this relentless growth on both sides, this is what led Eisenhower to give his famous warning.
Yes, President Eisenhower, the former 5-star general who led the Allies in Europe, in his farewell address in 1961, he warned starkly about the growing power of the military-industrial complex, this new nexus of the armed forces and the massive arms industry. He recognized humanity now had enough weapons not just for defense, but to destroy the entire world many times over. And this isn't just history, is it? As you listen, realize this is the foundation of modern deterrence theory, the reason for arms control treaties. The existential threat that, frankly, still hangs over us today, it shapes everything.
It really does. And this threat, this logic of overkill, it must have sparked opposition.
Oh, absolutely. Starting in the 1950s, thousands, eventually millions of people around the world began organizing, protesting the arms race, nuclear testing, the sheer insanity of building enough weapons to destroy the planet multiple times. Fallout from atmospheric tests became a huge public concern. A key moment was the Russell-Einstein Manifesto in 1955. Signed by Einstein just before he died, largely written by Bertrand Russell. This powerful text warned of universal death and made this desperate appeal to humanity. Unite, transcend national loyalties, abolish war, especially nuclear war. A call from science and philosophy.
And philosophers grappled with it too, trying to find language for this unprecedented threat.
They did. Gunther Anders, a German philosopher, wrote in 1956 about our blindness to apocalypse, how we struggle to truly comprehend the scale of nuclear destruction. He coined the term globicide, the destruction of the globe itself. Later in the 80s, John Somerville used omnicide, the destruction of all life. There was also this strategic concern in the 50s that the U.S. was putting itself in a strategic straitjacket, meaning that by relying so heavily on massive nuclear retaliation, the U.S. had no good options for smaller conflicts. It was all or nothing. You couldn't realistically use nuclear weapons in a limited war like Korea. This led the Kennedy administration in the early 60s to develop the concept of flexible response, moving beyond just massive retaliation, developing conventional forces, counterinsurgency capabilities, having options other than nuclear annihilation, an attempt to regain some strategic maneuverability.
Trying to find a way out of the all-or-nothing trap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the underlying reality of nuclear war remained horrifying. There's a chilling anecdote, maybe it's true, maybe not, from Fred Kaplan's book, Wizards of Armageddon, about a civilian being briefed on nuclear war plans in the early days. He keeps asking the military briefer, okay, what happens after the nuclear exchange? What's the end state? Finally, the exasperated officer supposedly says, look, if there's 2 Americans and 1 Russian left alive, we win. And the civilian calmly replies, well, you better hope that the 2 Americans are a man and a woman. It's dark, but it just underscores the unthinkable reality behind those abstract war plans, the utter devastation implied by winning.
It really brings it home.
And it raises this important question, doesn't it? The Cold War is over, thankfully, but the atomic age endures. These weapons are, unsettlingly, still with us.
Hmm.
The conversation around them, sparked again recently by films like Oppenheimer, by current global events, it's a powerful reminder of this profound, often terrifying history we've just explored. A history that continues to shape our present and our future, demanding constant vigilance, constant diplomacy, considered policy.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth taking a moment just reflecting on the immense journey we've covered. We started with those early, almost theoretical musings of scientists like Klaproth, Curie, Rutherford, moved through the critical breakthroughs, the wartime urgencies, Stellard, Fermi, Meitner, witnessed the earth-shattering reality of the Trinity Test, and then explored the aftermath, the reshaping of global power, the dawn of the Cold War, the birth of nuclear fear, the enduring atomic age. It's really a story of how fundamental scientific curiosity, mixed with global conflict and human ingenuity and fear, converged to unleash a force that just forever changed our world.
The enduring legacy is immense. It stretches into every corner of international relations, national security, even our collective consciousness. Understanding this history isn't just about dates and names, is it? It's about comprehending the immense responsibility that comes with scientific advancement, especially when coupled with global power. It's about recognizing how decisions made under unimaginable pressure decades ago continue to shape our present reality and influence our future choices. The very concepts of war, deterrence, sovereignty, international cooperation, they're all irrevocably altered by these events.
So as you, our listeners, go about your day, maybe consider this provocative thought. The atomic age was born from human ingenuity and desperation during a world war. It ushered in an era where humanity gained the terrifying power to destroy itself. Now, as we continue to advance scientifically, pushing frontiers in AI, biotechnology, genetic engineering, space, what are the new challenges, the new frontiers that demand similar foresight, similar ethical consideration, a similar collective commitment to avert global catastrophe rather than just, win the next conflict? Think about what lessons from the dawn of the atomic age about unforeseen consequences, about the weight of knowledge, about the profound responsibility that comes with immense power. What lessons still resonate most powerfully for us today?